Hello, welcome to lesson 3. Today we are going to be talking about Gothic novels and Anne Radcliffe with her book The Mysteries of Udolpho. Remember, please do not share my videos on any servers or you will be prosecuted. It is illegal against the Polish law, and if you do so, I will block you forever and I will sue you. Okay, so let's get started. This is Mrs. Anne Radcliffe. She looks kind of cool. I enjoy her aesthetic. And now, back to all seriousness, I'm sorry. So the Gothic literature genre was dominated by women. It gained popularity at the end of the 18th century. The first Gothic novel that can be dated back is by Horace Walpole, and it's The Castle of Otranto in 1764. The peak in popularity is 1790, which is when Anne Radcliffe and Matthew Gregory Lewis write books. And the sort of waning end of the Gothic novel is by Charles Maturin, I'm not sure, Melmoth the Wanderer, but it's 1820. So as you can see, it's a genre that stays popular for about 60 years, but as I mentioned, the peak is with this lady here. So, it's a reactionary genre, just as I said, Romanticism was reactionary to the Enlightenment. This is a reactionary genre in a way of dealing with repressed social fears and political unrest. It was a time of great upheaval. There was the American Revolution, the Regency crisis, French Revolution, the Reign of Terror, and this was, especially the last one, was threatening to the Brits because of Napoleon. Okay, so elements: the urbanization, industrialization, the waning and ending of the Enlightenment. Like, it was the very, very end, but still, it existed. Political, social, and scientific revolutions, and also the rise of the middle class. Gothic literature became a sort of form of escapism from this unpleasant daily life full of fear, and instead of giving us something pleasant, it gave us even scarier things. So, I mean, not us, the people that lived back in the 18th century. And instead of reading about daffodils, etc., they read about terrifying things and thought, wow, my life is less shitty in comparison. So, Mysteries of Udolpho. These are the elements featured. So, economic fears of women marrying up. Women didn't get to marry out of love, they had to marry in order to gain social status and cash. There were social fears, like we see banditti. Sorry, I'm not Italiano, but we see banditti and fear of violence and war. And also elements of the middle class, because the main protagonist, Emily, is a noble, but she's nearer to the upper middle class. So she's not rich, but she has money and she has castles. Okay, so I think the most important thing to sort of outline are the features of Gothic in general. So there's a pretense that the author is merely the editor of a found manuscript. This is something that we saw with books like Robinson Crusoe and the early novels, where authors would say, oh, I didn't create this, I found this somewhere, and I'm only editing it. This was used to make it more realistic and more scary, because if you think that you found someone's memoirs about terrifying demons and ghosts, it makes it more scary than knowing that some old lady wrote it in her room. Medieval and superstitious Southern Catholic Europe setting, so Italy, Austria, maybe France. There's supernatural, there's mainly a hero versus villain trope, there's the decay of the primogeniture and of the feudal aristocratic rights. The feudal system was becoming less and less important, there were no longer knights, nie było wasali, itd. itp. Królów, rycerzy. Instead, we had the middle class. The rise of the bourgeoisie, so better and more ambitious, more free, focused on how women were victimized but still defiant. There's a common motive of confined spaces for people who are claustrophobic, so dungeons, castles, monasteries. There's anachronism, so it's set in the past. It's not chronological, it's a clash of modernity and antiquity. There's a wild landscape, the sublime. Typically, there's a tyrannical older man who suppresses the heroine and wants to abuse her sexually and murder her most of the time for some reason. There are obscured family ties, so at the end of the book, it often turns out that the main character was somehow related to the other character And there's also often incest. And morbid and lurid imagery like incest. Okay, so the reason for there being castles is to make the reader experience the sublime more. And let's get into the mysteries of Udolpho. Actually, let's not yet. Last thing about the Gothic that I have to say is that it was sort of divided into subgenres in two ways. First of all, historical Gothic, school of terror, romantic school of horror. The first one, supernatural and realistic elements of history. The second one, school of terror, where Radcliffe created. So fantasy of the past, first feeling of safety, only to then terrorize. And the romantic school of horror, supernatural, not rationalized away, like in School of Terror. So at the end, they don't say, like in Scooby-Doo, oh, the monster was a man in a mask. Instead, the supernatural remains the supernatural. And the second sort of place where the Gothic splits is between female Gothic and male Gothic. So female Gothic is the literary expression of women's social and domestic fears. There's discontent for the patriarchy, for gender roles. It's reciprocal relationship between female authors and their audiences. Women got women. They understood what they were going through. There's also a persecuted heroine and a male villain, which empowers the female identity, and the supernatural is explained, whereas the male Gothic is sometimes called the true Gothic, because of course everything that's true and good has to be made by men. It's unexplained, mysterious supernatural elements, so as I said, Scooby-Doo analogy doesn't exist. The scenes of sexual abuse are described really vividly in comparison to female Gothic. Wow, what a shocker. Women are presented as almost monstrous or unnatural, and some of this is also seen in The Mysteries of Udolpho, but not as much as in male Gothic. And also there's this insubordinate protagonist against the world, and a merciless universe. So, in The Mysteries of Udolpho, we have Emily, she's the main protagonist. Her mum dies, her dad dies, she cries every 10 pages of the novel, and then she gets taken in by her aunt, who wants to make her marry loads of old men so she can have money, and she doesn't want old men, she wants her lover Valancourt. Let's see if he pops up. But Valancourt is... no, he doesn't, I don't know what this is. Okay. Valancourt doesn't pop up, at least in the middle, and she has to sort of keep fighting in order not to marry loads of old men, and she cries a lot, and she lives in the castle of Udolpho, and she sees ghosts. She sees like a dead body, or what she thinks is a dead body. She sees a veiled figure. So she's permanently terrorized. There's also a motive with a nun called Agnes, who is crazy and who is also a murderer in the past. I doubt that the summary of this text will be on the test, seeing as we were told to only read fragments, so I won't delve deeper. Something that's interesting is that men and Anglican priests criticized Gothic literature because they claimed it seduces readers and leaves them unable to distinguish between good and evil, virtue and vice. So, of course, when men and priests saw that women were having the time of their lives writing really scary, funny, cool books, they said, no, you cannot do that. Well, I'm sorry, my throat is getting really dry. But yeah, they were really against it, and I find it kind of funny, and this is like my own commentary, but I find it funny that priests claimed that they would be unable to distinguish between good and evil because of a book. That's slightly paradoxical, I guess. Reasons for popularity, the last thing I can mention. So, safety and entertainment, and female empowerment and independence. Because in this book, Emily comes out on top. She's a winner. She's a survivor. She ends up marrying Valancourt, the love of her life. She gains all of these castles after all the bad guys die. She's super rich and she's super happy. And all is good. Also, really last thing, beauty and sublime are intertwined here. Because we have the Castle of Udolpho, which is scary and dangerous and so masculine. And we have La Vallée, where Emily's from, which is pleasurable and social and feminine. So yeah, just more stereotypes. It's a book full of stereotypes and things that are meant to be scary but are not. But still, it was revolutionary for its time. Have a nice day. Bless you.